again, and so excited to welcome you to this event. This is not a sponsored event by any means. It's just me and Mike deciding to get together and do something that we thought was meaningful, which is discuss capacity planning and forecasting in customer success. If you're not familiar, Mike Sasaki is a pretty incredible thought leader in the space, and he's someone who is quite tactical in addition to a great storyteller, so very interested to hear his perspectives today. He leads the global customer success and support team for Mitek Systems. That is a team of about 20 people right now. They're global. Mitek is a publicly traded company with over 600 employees. Their typical ARR for customers is between 10,000 and several million. His CSM accounts tend to be focused on the larger lifetime value accounts, which he'll tell us more about. But Mike also has over a decade of experience in software as a service and doing customer success for SaaS companies. Oracle, for instance, he came from before, and he's worked on some of the largest brands around the globe. So I am thrilled to hear from him about how he personally has done capacity planning and forecasting. Some of the outcomes that we're going to hear about today are around not just how to do the forecasting for increased headcount and increased budget for your department, but also how to then pitch that to your stakeholders and executives.
Thank you, Kelly, for offering to produce and host this event. It's something that is something I wish I had 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, someone that would tell me what capacity planning is, for one, how to secure budget, and how to secure headcount. And what I'm going to share with you is my experience. And, I want to really have it as conversational as possible. So if you have questions, if you don't agree with something, that's probably even better to some degree. Would love to have that debate because, like I mentioned, this is my experience, right? And so everyone kind of has their own experiences, but hopefully you can learn something from today's session. Let me start my... Cool. All right, so what are we going to cover? Capacity planning with the outcome hopefully being I've secured headcount, I've secured budget, and it becomes a math question, versus trying to convince your CEO every time I need headcount, right? I want to get it down to a math question. So every time something happens, we hire someone, right? Or when this happens, we get budget. So that's really what we're going to boil it down to today. Let me set some context here. Mitek, Kelly touched on it a little bit. We are a publicly traded company, market cap around 500 million, give or take 10 million or 20 million, depending on the day. You're probably all customers of Mitek. If you've ever deposited a check with your phone, that's Mitek. We have 98% of the market there. So banks use us to help them with their mobile check deposit. That product is great and totally mature, and I don't work on that product at all. So I work on the identity side. So we've taken that same technology, and if you stay at an Airbnb, you may be asked to take a picture of your driver's license and take a selfie, right? Or if you're transferring money with PayPal, you may be asked to take a picture of yourself, a selfie, and your driver's license. So that's our technology. We have a few hundred customers ranging in the revenue that Kelly mentioned, 10,000 to well over a couple million as well. What else is important here? Nothing really else is important there. We're based out of San Diego, one of the few San Diego software companies, and that's where I live, in San Diego. All right. Let me see if I can advance this. So what is capacity planning? Capacity planning is really the idea that you can figure out, do I have enough resources to accomplish what I need to accomplish, right? That is capacity planning. And it's really important, especially as we enter into a recession, supposed recession, that you have this all dialed in. You've thought about it, you have it ready to go when your CEO asks for it. In its current state, what are the resources that I need in order to accomplish the things that I need to accomplish, right? Why is it important? It's important because, and let me just kind of take you through my experience. So I've worked at a startup with less than 10 people. We sold that company to a publicly traded company, Calidus Cloud, midsize. And then I worked at Oracle, where we had tons of money and tons of resources, right? So I've had all those experiences. at a startup, it was pretty easy to get headcount in some ways, in that I wasn't asked to do, create a plan or create all these justifications, but it was hard to get headcount in that we didn't have a lot of money, right? So that was one challenge. Then at Calidus Cloud, it was somewhere in between. And then at Oracle, it was pretty easy to get headcount because we had a lot of money. And then Mitek is somewhere in between, right? So at Mitek, it's important to, I would say, to justify what headcount you need with actual numbers and what the outcome is going to be. And hopefully that resonates with all of you, and that's probably the situation that you're in. And then I'll get into how do you create a capacity plan. So let me pause there and see if there are any questions on any of those three. Okay, off to a good start. All right, so how do you take your capacity plan and turn it into a successful executive pitch for customer success, headcount, and budget? So after you're done with your capacity plan, and I'm actually going to walk you through what one looks like, that's half the job. The other half is actually pitching to your CEO, to the CFO, or to the COO, right? And that's really important as well, because if you can't do that correctly, then you're not going to get the budget and the headcount. So there's the worksheet that is the capacity plan, and then there's the pitch that is the PowerPoint, and I'll walk you through both today. Okay, so let me dive into the actual capacity plan.
As you pull that up, is there anyone doing capacity planning right now at your company? Just like you can either drop it in chat, like yes, or come off mute. Yep, sweet. This is timely.
Oh, good. Okay, great. So we got three, or everyone. Probably makes sense.
All right, this is timely for a lot. That makes sense. Perfect.
And would love to hear your experience too as I'm walking you through this. And then if you have any tips to add on top, that'd be great for all of us. So I start off with asking questions, right? I want to get all the information. I want to get my mind thinking before I have to enter in numbers. That's just the way I think and the way I work. And so what is your customer's appropriate experience, right? Borrowing from Lincoln Murphy. And that is one thing that he said that I really like, is thinking about the customer's appropriate experience. And ironically, what came to my mind was, I don't have to give a great customer experience to my customers. And that was a little bit counterintuitive. You'll probably won't hear many customer success leaders say that. I actually don't need a happy customer. I don't need a customer that loves their customer experience with us. I do need a successful customer, right? I do need to drive success. They're highly focused on metrics. And so I'll go ahead and write that down just as a reminder, right? And that was somewhat shocking. I never really asked myself that question. By going through this process, I did learn that, and I said the same thing at Pulse, that a happy customer churns. A happy customer can churn. It's a lot harder for a successful customer to churn, right? It doesn't mean be a jerk to your customers, but it does mean that, you don't have to lean on the customer's always right. We have to entertain their feedback. If they want a product feature, we got to consider it, right? Often you can say no, and maybe is a terrible answer in a lot of cases, and especially to customers. Hearing maybe is not the best answer. So that's the first question I ask. The second question I ask is, and I could send this out if you all want this template. I realize this is going to be a lot of information. Second question I ask is, how many customer success managers do we need to give our customers their appropriate experience? And what I was able to do is I broke it up by journey. I didn't always do this. When a customer would sign on, I would assign a CSM, any CSM, to the customer, right? But what a customer really needed is the appropriate experience in the beginning during onboarding, and I'll define onboarding, but during onboarding, they needed a project management type CSM. And not every CSM is a project management type CSM. I'm certainly not. I go with feel more than anything else, right? And so I would be really bad with our customers the first year. But if they have escalations and things like that, and they're up and running, I'm a really good CSM in that case. So I identified that we needed a type of CSM for onboarding. We define onboarding as from signing to when they are reaching time to value. And we have a metric for that. It's a transaction number that they have to hit, right? So that's how we define it. It's typically a year. I used to define onboarding as when they go live, but that's really a milestone in the onboarding journey, right? When they go live and the pipes are all connected. Great, they can run a transaction in production, but are they successful yet? No, they're not, right? So would love to hear any thoughts on that. If any of you have had that transition of thought like I have, or if you disagree, let me know. But once a customer is onboarded, then we can pass that customer off to a CSM, and they're always in really good shape at the end of the onboarding, right? And they're always in the same position. I say always in quotes, but it's more standardized. And so the CSMs can, and they end up being able to take more customers because they don't have one customer that's wildly successful and one customer that is not successful. Every single customer they take on is successful, how we define it, right? So that's been super helpful. And just asking that question kind of got me there to the answer of I need 2 onboarding CSMs and 14, now it's higher, 18 post onboarding CSMs. So I'll pause there, see if you have any questions on those first 2 questions. Okay, great. And then how long has customer success been an org at your company? That's an important question in my opinion, because the way it traditionally works is year 1, you come in there as a CS org and it's like you're a magician, right? You're giving back people time, product gets time, engineering's not meeting with customers, sales can go out and sell, you're turning customers from red to green. We're really good at that. And then year 2, it becomes more about, are you driving expansion? Year 3 is, are you driving revenue? And then year 4 is, you're very expensive, right? You are a very expensive org, right? So having a capacity plan built out that kind of shows the journey answers a lot of those criticisms and those questions up front. You know, this is where we'll be in each year as well, right? So hopefully that is similar to the experiences that you have had. It's certainly the same experience that I've had in every place that I've been, how customer success is viewed. And right now I'm in year 5+, so I'm kind of out of my element, and I'm feeling like the pressure of owning revenue and driving revenue and almost taking over the expansion part of it on my shoulders, right? That seems like the natural evolution because CSMs are really good at expanding. We don't always like to have that number though. So it is kind of like an uncomfortable position for a lot of customer success leaders. How are you measured? How mature is your product? And I'll get into that in a second as well once we start going through the worksheet. But the headline there is, the less mature your product is, the more CSMs you're going to need to support it. And that needs to be something communicated to the management team, right? And the cost to revenue, that metric is one that I really follow, cost to revenue. So the cost of the CSM and the revenue that they're carrying, right? So I'll get into those percentages and kind of benchmarks where other companies are at. Skip through some of these. I'll cover this in a little bit. Who does the customer success org roll up to? Depending on the CEO, COO, CEO, or CFO, you have to have a different strategy with each of those because they care about different things. And then there's a calculator here that when I send it out, you can play with. But how many hours a month does a CSM devote to customer focused work? Plug it in there. On average, how many overall hours per month are spent with one client? How many customers do you currently have? How many CSMs do you have? And the output of this calculator is, it'll tell you, what do you need to hire, right? Or are you okay? That's part of this capacity plan is, do I have enough resources? So in this case, this example, I need to hire 5 CSMs in order to achieve all the things that I want.
Mike, can I ask a question here?
Yeah, please.
And this may be covered in your how to pitch it to executives portion, but I just reflecting on some of my own experience with these numbers. Do you find that you would expose, hey, I feel that we have 100 hours devoted to customer focused work each week, et cetera, and people would be like, okay, how did you come up with those numbers? Are you like timing them? Can you prove how many meetings they're having? Like, how granular do you feel you have to get with this information in the background?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I start off asking the CSMs because I've been in the situation where my hours are tracked, and 1, I hated it, and 2, I just made it up, right? If I'm being honest. So that was at Oracle. So I asked them, and then I kind of just get an idea from all of them and say, okay, now I know how much time a QBR takes, how much they're spending on this, so I can kind of average it, right? And figure out, like, remove the outliers. Where are we at with the hours? But that's a great question because that is something that is asked. I don't want to get into the details with the CEO right away, but if I'm asked to, I can do that. Nick, I saw you come off.
Yeah, thanks. And I just had a question kind of on that same topic. If you have CSMs that have kind of very different ways of working and splitting up their time of how they manage their book of business, so like how do you get to a reasonable average? I kind of ran into this very similar model kind of approach of looking at time to task and like how does it balance? But I think one thing we struggle is, just for context, we have a wide range of size of customer also. It's like kind of a wide, and so some take a lot more time, 2 hours a week in some cases, even in maturity, and some are taking like 2 hours in a month at most. So it is just kind of a wide range. So, and then there's the other complexity of like the CSMs actually have just a different way of working. For even if there was a standard, just one type of client, there's still different methods and kind of backgrounds that each CSM has. So how do you arrive at kind of a rational average?
In that case, I would segment, right? So I think what I heard was there are different segments of customers, and then you can categorize them, and you could probably see some commonality there. That okay, for our extra large customers, it takes about this many hours. For our smaller ones, this many hours, and so on. That's where I would start. And then styles, I love different styles. I mean, I could do a whole webinar on my hiring practices, in that like I encourage different styles. I think one thing that I won't get in a tangent, Kelly, but one thing CS leaders do, and all leaders do, is they find one that works and they try and hire that same person, right? And they build a team of the same people. And that sounds great in theory, but I love different styles, and we have wildly different styles. I don't know if that answers your question, Nick, but I would try and categorize them and then come up with the hours on that. It's also just a great exercise for CS leaders to know what's the difference between how my CSMs work, right? It's just good to be educated on that when you're leading a group. Looks like we have some questions in the chat. Nick, did you have a follow-up, or is there?
Yeah, I was just gonna say thank you. That's all.
Oh yeah, sure.
And Nick, are you leading customer success at Simple Legal? Just going off your background.
Yes. Yep.
Cool. Yeah. When you come up, just like say your name and where you're working. It's helpful context. Chris or
absolutely.
Joe, do you guys want to add any commentary to Nick's question? Looks like you had some good feedback in the chat here.
Yeah, I'm just reading it right now. And Jessica had a question. We're still in the early days. Would love to know about what are the right triggers to validate when you hire someone new, and how many to onboard at a time.
And I
can get into that
and explain a little bit further if it's at a different point you get to. So I'm Jessica Bach. I am a program manager at One Health. We're still pretty small, so we're kind of right in that world. We have one CSM, but it's a role that we realize is incredibly important, especially right now as we're really starting to see the sales funnel grow and starting to see signatures grow. It's going to become even more important as we talk about the deployment and the growth piece, that kind of like you were laying out there. And so the big question for us right now is, what are your triggers, right? What are your triggers in terms of thinking you don't want to hire too early, because then you have a bunch of people sitting around with processes that are semi-defined. But then on the other half, you don't want to hire too late, because then you have a bunch of customers who are, stuck with engineers and product managers with their time in places that they probably don't need to be. So that's what we're trying to kind of define out right now, and would love to hear like tips.
Yeah, I've got some thoughts on that. I would say if you can hire, because I've had headcount approval frozen before many times, right? And I'm always like trying to get the job description done before I get approval, and just getting front of line with people ops, right? So if you have that luxury, definitely hire, get the headcount, right? Because they could always shadow. You have to understand also how long it takes for CSM to onboard. And for us, it's 6 months until they break even. And so I take that into account as well. But I mean, the reality is I'm always behind in hiring, right? I always feel like I could use more. Yeah, right. So I think the key is then, what is the trigger for the CEO, right? And how do you align on what the trigger is? Because I could have a trigger and our CEO can have a different trigger. My trigger doesn't matter. You know, so it's like trying to align on that is really the key.
Yeah, and right now a lot of it's still really around, revenue in versus, right? So we kind of have
that's a good place to start. I mean, it makes sense to everyone and it's simple. That's the other part of capacity planning is you'll see mine is very simple. You can do it a lot of different ways that are very complicated, complex, and probably in some ways better. But it was important to me to keep it simple. And if I can get everyone on board with a simple capacity plan, staffing model, then I'm better off. Yeah, so hopefully that answers your question. And I'll get into what I look for actually, the actual triggers. And Joe, thank you for the comments, Joe. Yeah, segmentation. Yep. Joe, I learned from sales colleagues to use typical recruiting timelines and the ramped equivalent approach to account for employee onboarding. Yeah, you could look around and you can see, what does it take for this person or that, but after a while you get a pretty good feel for how long it's going to take. In general, 6 months is pretty good. And then, that's what I would start, and then let the data lead you, right? As you do hire. Okay. So let's jump into the capacity plan. And what you see here, this is all dummy data. I should have put the base salaries higher for CSMs. I feel like we're always on the low end compared to our sales colleagues, but that's a good start. So right here, I'll go through the columns and stop me at any point and ask questions, but this is the worksheet that I use. And number one thing I do is you got to partner with someone. So I partner with our finance team in this case, right? And I said, how do you do a staffing model, capacity planning, right? How would you do it? And then we just had conversations and we came up with this, and I thought it was really good for our needs. So we list out the CSMs and the roles, right? So how many CSMs, you put their names, you can put their names here. And then the location that matters for a global team. In Spain, it's like half the price as it is in the United States. So that's an important bit of context. List their base salary, and then if they have a variable or a bonus, you put it in here. What you're trying to get to is the all-in cost, right? That's the ultimate number that you're trying to get to. So you have your bonus here. T&E.
Right, this is all your actuals that you're saying, right? You're not doing projected yet.
These are all actuals, yeah.
Okay.
Yep, these are all actuals. Yeah, so in the current year, fiscal year, where are you at, right? And then T&E, travel and entertainment for the year, you could put in here. This has gone down significantly. And this is dummy data. We don't have 30,000 per person, but I wanted to use some round numbers here. Learning and development, it's important to put that in there as well. So we can go to conferences, we can attend anything we need to. Domain expertise is really important as well. So it's often overlooked, and we focus on the functional part of it. But in order to have that trusted advisor role, you really need to know your domain, right? So know the product, know the domain, know the customer and the function of customer success. Overhead, I put 25%. I think that's a good number. Software, electricity, air conditioning, all of that. So then I arrive at an all-in cost per CSM, right? And that's the number that I'm after. And that's the first important number that I need for the capacity plan. I'll pause there, see if there's any questions, if I've confused anyone. Okay, cool. I'll skip J. So K is the annual revenue each CSM is carrying, right? That's pretty common. You have to look at that. It's an input. We're actually working on a new evolved model, but I won't get into that, but we're using our data analyst in order to do that. And I do recommend getting your own data analyst in customer success and stop borrowing the data analyst from the other team, because we're always put at the back of the line. So it's better just to have your own. But from these two, all-in costs and annual revenue, you get a cost to revenue, right? Which is just this divided by this. So all-in cost divided by annual revenue gets you cost to revenue. Industry standard, at least what it used to be a couple of years ago, is about 7%. Gainsight, when they first started, and even after, years after, they're at about 15% because their product was immature, right? So it takes more CSMs to support it. Oracle, we were driving towards 3%. which is like very, very good, right? So anywhere from 3 to 10, you'll see. And I would say 7 is good. But once you start seeing this number, and kind of to answer your question, Jessica, I pay attention to this number. And once it gets to 5 or so for any CSM, then I start thinking about, okay, we need to start hiring, right? Because that number is getting too low, which kind of triggers or signals that they have too much. They have too much. But the other piece of this is how many customers they have, right? And so I do keep track of that as well. From L to O is what is the mix of customers, right? So how many extra large, medium, and small customers do they have? So let me pause there. Any questions about cost to revenue? Is that a term you've heard before?
I was gonna say, actually, if you don't mind expanding just a little bit on that to make sure I understand it properly.
Yeah, so the cost is the all-in cost that we got from all these expenses with the customer or with the CSM, and then the revenue is how much revenue they're carrying, and then you you divide the all-in cost by the revenue. So the cost of the CSM divided by the revenue they're carrying gives you the cost of revenue, and you want to be at around 7%, driving down, and that's what the capacity plan and the model will show you is how you get to 4% over time. Right. And the question that I get from my CEO is, that's great, I'll approve this headcount, but you can't keep hiring one CSM for every X number of customers. I'm not going to keep approving that, right? You got to build in efficiency. You got to show me how you're going to scale this. And that was really what drove this plan, because it's a fair ask, right? We have to show how we're going to scale our org. And so, so all these metrics kind of build into how we're going to scale it. But this number you'll see come down over time in my plan.
It makes sense to me that you're essentially taking in how much they cost versus their book of business. But why is 4% the norm or the standard? It seems like, I mean, just off the bat, I'd be like, oh, 7-8%, that's good.
Yeah, 7% is the standard. But
Okay.
Trying to drive towards 4% is the number I picked in my plan. Yeah, Oracle was really at trying to get to 3%. And I've seen what happens when an org tries to get to 3%. It gets really operational, really like, where are you spending your time? You know, track your hours, track your this or that, and track your expenses, right? So then you're just spending time as a CSM tracking everything. Every single dollar I spend, every hour I spend, I'm tracking. So then we can say, you know, drive towards 3%. Look for areas where we can cut out so that we can get to 3%. But 7% is good, for sure.
Got it.
Now, the sizes of the customer, one mistake that CS leaders make, I think, and because I made it, is just looking at revenue, right? So we look at LTV, and we look at it through the lens of, what is this customer going to be in 3 years, right? What is the potential? And that's dangerous when you put sales in charge of assigning potential to a customer, because every deal they come in is going to be huge, right? So it's important that you assign what this customer is going to be in 3 years. One good example is, let's just say your customer is American Express and they're $20,000 a year, and your largest customers are $5 million a year. If you just did it based on revenue, they would be a small customer, right? They have logo importance, which is usually built in, but they also have potential, because we know that they can do a lot of business. So then you would assign them as potentially an extra large customer. In 3 years, we expect them to be $1 million plus, right? And so that's how you would assign, and that's how you define LTV, or at least that's how I have. I'll pause there. Let me just cover this real quick. The number of customers per CSM, that's a metric too. So cost to revenue, and then customers per CSM. Those are two very important metrics that you should know. And you know, surprisingly, I don't know if you all experience this, but I ask, you know, if you were to ask your CSMs, do they know how many customers they have, and do they know how much revenue they carry? I would assume so, but I get some wild answers or some blank stares sometimes too. So it's very telling. Doesn't mean they're bad CSMs, just kind of tells you how CSMs think about the business world. Okay. And I realize also that this is high touch. My model is high touch, right? And I have thoughts on low touch. I have thoughts on tech touch. If you're at the Pulse session I did, I've admitted that I've been unsuccessful, wildly unsuccessful at low touch and tech touch. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how anyone does it. I know people do it successfully. I should probably attend some of those webinars, but I certainly can't teach how to do that. And so I've been focused on our biggest customers and our small customers. We have a lot of them. We are still working on that model and how to nail it. Okay, so I'll get into revenue and what the next, I said 5 years, but I have 4 years here. I'll pause. Any questions? Any criticisms? Any?
I have a question. If and others, please feel free. Don't let me monopolize. If you were to say, all right, we're at 9% or 11%, we're striving for 4%, isn't tech touch the inevitable in some ways thing that your CEO is going to be like, all right, how are we going to build in automations here? I mean, I feel like it inevitably goes that way, and everyone.
Well, that's a great point. That is a great point. You do have to. I think the future is a hybrid. I don't think the future is a split of white glove like I do or tech touch. I think it's a hybrid. And so that's the efficiency gains that I've built in, is how can they self-serve sometimes, right? And just our example is a lot of our customers, they have to get our reporting manually from a CSM. That's a great opportunity for us, right? If we can somehow deliver self-service reporting, then customers can get, and then the analysis can be done by CSM. That's great. And that's more of a hybrid. So it is introducing tech touch, but with the idea that they're not alone with the technology. It's more of a hybrid model.
I like that.
Okay. Andrea, I saw you're off mute.
I'm Andrea. I'm also from Simple Legal. So you mentioned that this is for your like high touch accounts. We definitely do a scale portion and a white glove dedicated. How do you kind of focus on your longer tail customers and staffing for that?
Yeah, that one's tough. We use the same type of model, but the numbers look different, right? So the salaries may be lower because they're junior CSM. The customer count will be higher. The revenue still has to make sense, right? It still has to make sense in a cost of revenue. So that cost of revenue column keeps us honest. It makes us know that it's still a good decision, that we aren't overpaying for supporting these customers, right? And so that I still use this model, but to say that I've figured out how to support the long tail would be inaccurate because I have not. And so we've tried a lot of things, in my career. I've tried one-to-many. I've tried salesperson only. I've tried a combination, salesperson and CSM. I've tried support only. I've tried actively churning. That one was my favorite though, by the way. Just actively churning the small one solves the problem to some degree, but it doesn't help you achieve your financial goals that you want as well. So I don't really have a good answer for that, unfortunately. Kelly, what about you? I mean, have you solved for a long tail, or what were your suggestions there in like supporting?
Yeah,
go for it.
About like 3 years ago, we kind of started a long tail, and we've been kind of iterating since. At first, it was just strictly focused on like renewals and any type of like reactive questions. And since then, we've evolved into basically sending like a couple of like proactive campaigns, we call them, every quarter, making sure folks are engaged. And we're lucky enough to have we use Churn Zero to be able to build in some like automation around like new user entry and just like pushing content to them. So we've touched the tip of the iceberg. We're far from experts on it, but we're definitely growing that as we're acquiring more companies and they have more longer tail customers. It's definitely part of our moving forward strategy.
We did look at our data. Those are all good tactics. We did look at our data, and we noticed, let's say, if we do a lot for those long tail. So it's not like we did nothing. We looked at the data. if we do a lot for the long tail, our churn rate is, let's just make it up, is 10%. If we do nothing, our churn rate's 15%. So it's like, what do we get out of that 5, you know? So we kind of thought about it that way. But Kelly, what do you think? Do you have thoughts on the long tail topic?
No, I don't have much to add. I unfortunately not super clever at it yet, but I'm reflecting in a sec. But I'd love for Vishali, if you want to come off mute and ask your question, and then I know Chris, you can't come off mute, but maybe we could weigh in here. And then I do want to make sure we still have time, Mike, to cover how we pitch all of this.
Oh yeah, I am keeping track. Yeah.
I'm watching the time. Vishali, what about your question here? Can you ask it?
Yeah, give me one. Can you hear me?
Oh
Yes.
yeah. Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. So I think my question was around the ARR. So should we be looking at, assuming the CSMs are on the quotas, should we be looking at the quota and their cost, or because this, I don't know, that's what my question was.
Mm-hmm.
And does the ARR also has got the growth, because the number looks like the recurring revenue? So does it also include the growth that we are expecting?
Yeah, so this one that I have is current state. So it's this fiscal year, actuals plus forecasted, right? It's a combination. Because usually in the middle.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it's actual plus forecasted, but current year. And then when I'm thinking about planning for next year, all of that is forecasted revenue, right? So I do look at, if you looked at my current one that I have another column that has next fiscal year revenue. And then it has all, all the numbers, and really it shows the growth that we're going to have, not only in revenue, but also in new logos that I've added in there. So you get with your sales partner and you ask how many new logos are you going to bring in a quarter. They tell you, what sizes, and then you can add it to your model. And that's going to really be the justification for new headcount based solely on growth in the next fiscal year. But I can tell you this, you will have to come in front of your CEO and talk about, I need headcount mid-year. That's just the reality of being a CS leader, is that you're going to get the forecast wrong. And so you need to have something that you could point back to, that is numbers and not just, verbal justification, right? You got to be able to point back to your plan, point back to the numbers and say, now it's time. Right. So you will have to make that pitch mid-year for sure. I have to do it many times a year.
And do you look at like 2-3 years of planning ahead of time, or like 3 years of long range planning? How do you do it?
Yeah. So I look at it in 4 or 5 years. It's 4 now because I did this last year. And so I kind of I updated it, but I look 5 years out. That's the plan. Now, the thing that's understood, and maybe it's good to clarify with your CEO, is that, or whoever your manager is that, this isn't going to be perfect, right? But it's certainly better than anything, maybe my peers have that are trying to hire, certainly better than anything I've had in the past. It's a model that we don't have to stick to 100%, but it's going to guide us, right? So that's really the point of this.
Yeah. No, I think I like the cost to revenue. Actually, it's a good one.
Yeah.
As we look at the growth and as we try to hire the headcount. So we generally look at the productivity also.
Yeah, and you can see how you add in the growth, you add in the new customers, you can see how the numbers change, right? And so that's what that'll signal the hire, and that's what you see here. We have our revenue forecast that I made up, but it goes across the top, and then year over year, what is the percentage increase? I keep track of quota bearing heads, and it's somewhat interesting just to kind of see the ratio and see how that changes over time. Average ACV of the deal we list here, number of deals, number of new logos. This one's really important. And then the churn, you build in your churn rate here, right? And then from here, you can scroll down and you can see, well, how many customers am I going to have over the next 4 years? Right? And what is my CSM coverage for each of these as well? So total CSM covered customers, average customers per CSM, you could see that grow over time, right? From 14 to 17. you could see the efficiency factors we build in. And this is where my finance partner helped me with. And so we list them here, but we have to detail what are those? What are those driving? What's driving the efficiency that we've listed here? So one example is self-service, the reporting that I talked about, right? Other things can be using tools like Churn Zero you mentioned. There's a lot of CS platforms that can help with that. The product, nothing beats the product improving and maturing, right? And you got to add that in here as well. And so those are all efficiencies that are going to drive our ability to go from 14 to 17 per CSM. And this is how many CSMs we will need: 9, 12, 16, 20, right? And so having this total and having this true at the same time is pretty good. It's a pretty good investment, right? And right here we have the incremental headcounts that are added, and then the ARR per CSM goes up. So not only does the customer count go up 14 to 17, the ARR per CSM goes from 2.2 to 3.5, right, in my model. And the cost to revenue goes down over time.
Got it. Okay.
From 10 to 6. And then the CSM per quota bearing head goes down as well, right, over time. So this one I'm less interested in, but but our finance partner, my finance partner, had it in here, so there's a reason. So I kept it. Yeah.
No, I think quota bearing head is a big thing for the finance. So I can completely imagine. So what is the industry standard for the efficiency improvement year over year?
That's a great question.
To the charger.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Well, I'm not in my office. There's a white one somewhere.
Oh, there we go. I'm not 100% sure. If we were out at happy hour, I'd probably tell you, the number that made my CEO comfortable is the right number to put in here. But I think 10% efficiency is according to my finance partner, is reasonable. 10 to 15. Not a great answer, I know. But it is something that you gotta have in here, and because it's going to drive the metrics you care about. And then you can also tie what are these things that are going to drive the efficiency.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And it's very great because there are constant changes in the business, and so it's really like we are changing the product, we are changing the processes, tools. So though the people are getting better at doing what they are doing because they are having more number of years under their belt, we are changing so many surrounding things. So it's very hard to figure out what is that right number looks like.
It is. And, this ties to budget too. That's the other piece, right? So efficiency, usually when you want to buy tools and things like that, it is adding efficiency, right? So now you could tie the budget request to, I need this to drive efficiency, and this is how it all ties together. Right? So it's a headcount. It's headcount and budget is what I'm trying to make the proper justification for here.
Point of clarification, you're using the term deal to describe expansion as well, right? New logos is new.
Yeah, I was wondering if you were going to catch that. Yeah, I don't love that term in here because it means expansion too. And in mine, I kind of remove it because it doesn't seem super important to me. The new logos matters more to me. But yeah, deals includes expansion. Yeah.
And then are you partnering with your finance partner to do the projections for 23, 24 around deals and logos?
Correct.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Sorry,
and they probably back into that number based on where we need to land as well. So yeah. Do you look at the same metrics for different types of CSMs? Onboarding, post-onboarding? Yeah, that's a great question. Because I don't necessarily, onboarding, it's hard to look at revenue because they're not necessarily revenue generating, right? So you might have to look at ACV. You might have to look at potential, something like that, and make a call. But whatever you decide to do, that formula, your finance partner, your CEO, your CFO have to be on board. And then once you are on board, you're gold, right? You're good to go because it's something that it's a number you made up kind of. it's an educated estimate, but everyone's agreeing to it, right? So that's the important part. But yeah, for onboarding, you don't necessarily get revenue from them right away. And so it's hard to say what that revenue is, and their numbers would look ugly if you had 0 for revenue, or, you know, whatever it is, the minimum commit. Yeah, so that's a good point. Yep. Okay, that's the worksheet. I think it's a good time to transition over to, there's some other notes I have in here that I kept in here. This is from, I think it's from my finance partner. I just kept in there, but I can transition over to, let me see if I can do this smoothly.
Do it. As you do that, Joe had a good comment in the chat talking about, you know, categorizing with your finance partner that the onboarding costs and budget are about customer acquisition costs and not about cost of goods sold.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Hey, can you all hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Joe. Hi.
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Sorry, I've been where it's really noisy and couldn't come off mute. Like the number one thing that I did to improve my budget and capacity planning situation was to successfully lobby my CFO that onboarding, which was all under my purview, my part of the org structure, and was coming out of a budget that was based on, you know, a certain percentage of revenue type of heuristic or measure, that onboarding is an acquisition cost and should not come out of that bucket and not be held to that cost of revenue type of threshold. And, you know, so that suddenly freed up a bunch more budget for things that were actually about retaining customers and didn't need to be built into acquisition costs.
That's a good call out, Joe. I mean, you could make the case that in a lot of organizations, signing a customer doesn't mean they're a customer. It means they're going to test out your software, right? And a lot of times once they achieve value, or maybe it's a pilot that they're under or a short-term contract, like they're not really a customer at that point. So you could make that case.
Yeah, well, and in particular, when you're selling like, hey, you know, subscribe, sign up, and as part of that, you get these onboarding services.
Yeah.
Well, that's an acquisition cost.
Yep. That's right.
And in particular, if your sales and finance execs will do sales backouts for deals that churn, say within, you know, whatever your onboarding period is, I don't know, 90 days, 60 days, whatever, then that bolsters the argument for onboarding being an acquisition cost, right? Because if they're backing out commissions, which are acquisition costs, you know, then that means that anything that is happening in that same period, you know, expense wise, is an acquisition cost.
I'm gonna have to write that down. I like that. That's a really strong point. Yeah, I like that. Cool. Thank you, Joe. All right. So I went through the capacity plan. Now the pitch, I'll keep this one brief. I do have some templates, but for purposes of this webinar, I put together some slides. So what do they care about, right? And that's really what I'm after. And if I know what whoever I'm pitching to cares about, then I can design the pitch a certain way. One thing that I always do with my requests for headcount is I just put it up front. I've seen my CEO just struggle to what are we talking about? When is the request going to come, right? And it's distracting. So up front, I'll just say, hey, I'm requesting a headcount for CSM, 2 onboarding managers. Now I'll walk you through why, right? So just get that out of the way. CEO will, at the end of the day, will care about revenue. Revenue will trump expenses. They need to see the ROI, and that's what you'll have in the capacity plan, right? What do I get from hiring this CSM? And the more you can frame hiring a CSM as offense versus defense, you know, defense is important, but there's a lot of offense that you'll get out of hiring a CSM as well. Beyond, you know, obviously driving revenue and things like that. But, you know, there's a lot of, at least for us, we are the front and center for a lot of our marketing events and requirements. And for those events, we have a requirement that we need a customer, right? And so we're able to drive a lot of those, whether it's a conference or a webinar or a lead gen type thing, right? So we're able to put that on the CSM. That's ROI right there. capacity plan that shows scale, and that's what I showed you there, is that they want to see that you have a 5-year plan, 3 to 5 year plan, that it's been thought through and that it makes sense. And then once you are able to sell your CEO on the idea of your capacity plan, you can always just go back to it, right? Go back to the capacity plan, and that becomes the pre-approval for your headcount, more or less. CFO is going to care about expenses more than revenue, although they care about revenue as well, but they're going to err on the side of expense monitoring, and they need to see in the capacity plan how expenses go down over time while revenue increases. So you want to highlight that as well, right? How are you going to drive expenses down, make the business unit profitable? One other piece that you might want to think about is how can you add revenue pieces to your success organization? One example is that we're starting to sell success packages, and I don't mean paying for a CSM, but there are things that we're able to do, like health checks, self-service reporting that we're going to charge for. We're in the fraud industry, so selling a fraud report to customers. War room support is big, so going live war room support, that's stuff you can sell as well. I'm against selling CSMs or having customers pay for CSMs, just as a line item. I don't think that's the right way to run an organization, but I'm softening that stance too over time. COO, expenses will trump revenue, metrics driven, and they're going to seek clarity on what CSMs do. And so of my 3 favorite orgs to report into, COO is probably my least favorite, because I haven't met a COO that really understands customer success. That's just my experience. And it's going to be expenses and metrics, and before you know it, you're going to be tracking hours and things like that. How many QBRs did you do? That type of thing, right? So that's the way I think about, oh, I have that up there. I forgot to remove that. Why banks trust us. And then in my slide, I make it very clear what my request is, right? 1 CSM headcount, 120 a year. These are the activities the CSM will do. These are the outcomes. And then this is the profile of the CSM I'm looking for, right? And that tends to answer the 3 questions that they have, at least for the time. So this is the slide that I always include. And I will end there, Kelly. We want to take any questions or
yeah, anyone want to hop on with questions? I mean, maybe can you give us a couple examples as what you might put for outcomes there, Mike?
Yeah, outcomes is you can go back to the objectives or the key results, things like net revenue retention, right? NPS scores. Those are always good. I do like NPS still. I'm one of the rare ones probably that likes NPS. If it's an onboarding manager, time to live, X number of days, time to value, X number of days. And then there's the other things as well that are probably less important to a CEO, but being able to participate or help out with different orgs, right? So product feedback, marketing events, things like that, right? Yeah, so I would list those in the outcomes.
How much do you find that successful headcount pitch would also require you to reflect on success from previous? Like maybe you've asked last year, it's like, hey, how did we track against all these objectives, activities from last time? Like prove that it was useful last time before advocating for new headcount?
Yeah, that's a good point. You can go back to what metrics did the CSMs affect positively, right? And you definitely want to call that out as well. And that could be in the outcomes. How is hiring this? What's the ROI of hiring this CSM? And that's got to be metrics driven as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just feel like personally, if I were doing it, I'd want to root it, at least in startup mode, I'd want to root it in education a little bit about how we performed the previous year, like a reminder about how the CS function works again, moving into, hey, this is how we're going to scale. Like, I love your concept of 1 to 5 years. What is that in general? And kind of tracking it all along that. In our final few minutes, anyone have either questions or actually thoughts on how you're doing this today with things you've seen work?
That's a really good point though, Kelly, that and that's a weakness that I have, is that I jump into the objective of the meeting. That's why my meetings always end early, but I also don't provide proper context. And so being able to do that in a pitch is super important. So that's a good call out. All right, any questions? I'll drop my email address if you want to reach out to me. I'm also on LinkedIn, but if you want the template, I know it went through, there's a lot of information in there. If you'd like to reach out to me and get a copy of the template, happy to share that with you. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Perfect. Mike, thank you so much for your time. This is awesome. I learned a ton, and I'll definitely be reaching out to you for your template, and we'll be using that soon. Thank you.
Right. Thank you all. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Have a
Take
great day,
care.
everyone. See
Thanks,
ya.
everyone. Bye-bye.